Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903.
As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Happy Thursday, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and we have a lot of breaking news actually to cover today. First of all, the judge in the Mar-a-Lago raid case has declined to issue a ruling from the bench. That means that she is just taking it under advisement, and she will issue a ruling on whether to appoint a special master, which is a third party to review the documents independently, and she will then issue a ruling as soon as she sees fit. So that could come out at any moment, and of course, we will break that all down. And next, we also have to talk about the FBI whistleblowers. And that is a really important story that we need to be following. And then finally, the Biden administration and all of the documents that just came out today of the correspondence between the Biden administration and Facebook, and whether or not there was any illegal, but certainly inappropriate collusion and trying to, in my opinion, interfere with the election based on what they allege is misinformation. So joining me now to break this all down is my very good friend, the editor-in-chief of Just the News, John Solomon. So John, thanks so much for joining me today.
Good to be with you.
All right, so let's start off first with the Mar-a-Lago raid ruling. So the judge, not really surprisingly, declined to issue a ruling from the bench. I went back and forth on these different filings, reading them. My opinion, of course, is that a special master is exactly what Merrick Garland himself called for by saying we should be fully transparent, have accountability. So why is the DOJ even fighting this?
It is an odd argument that they're making. They're arguing three things. One, that the president's claim of executive privilege can't be legitimate when it's used against an executive branch agency. And of course, there's a lot of history that goes to a different side of this. All the disputes have not always been between Congress and the executive branch. Executive privilege is designed to protect the privilege, regardless of who the person seeking to pierce it is. And so I think the judge is taking that under advisement. There's a second part of the Justice Department saying that national security would be risk if there was any time lost to go through these documents and sort them out the proper way. It's very interesting that in this court case, the idea of what we call taint teams or filter teams, one of the things that we've learned about the Justice Department said, you can trust us. That the argument they made to the judge today is, Judge Cannon, you can trust us. We're the Justice Department. We're not going to cheat. But when you take a look at the last 3 years of court disputes over these filter teams, where one lawyer in the Justice Department vets the documents for the other lawyer, his colleague in the department, not a whole lot of separation and independence. The appeals courts are increasingly becoming uncomfortable with the Justice Department. This is sort of a contrived mechanism, a very new mechanism in the last 10 years that's been created. The courts are becoming a lot more skeptical of it, that, hey, you are on the same team. Just because you're not directly assigned to the case doesn't mean the Justice Department still doesn't have a conflict of interest to weigh issues like executive privilege, attorney-client privilege, things like that. And so right now there's a case pending before the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is looking at a writ of certiorari. It could very well rule in the next few weeks on it. So the courts have been increasingly skeptical that the Justice Department can do an honest job doing this. And in the face of that skepticism, Merrick Garland decides to double down on these taint teams, on these filter teams. And I think you saw a judge today that says, not so fast. I'm not going to make a hasty ruling on this. I want to absorb all this. You don't only absorb the history of this case, you have to look at the last 5 years of concern that the courts have expressed over the Justice Department procedures here.
Yeah, and I think that the judge was also really wise to issue a written ruling because she knows that either way, it's likely to get appealed. And so rather than just making a ruling from the bench, this will give her a lot more time to have complete substance for the record so that then when it goes up on appeal, all of those things will be included and especially the legal rationale. But there's a great piece from you in Just the News about this Supreme Court case that's going up. I hope that the court does grant the writ and actually hears that case. And so for anyone listening, I always follow John Solomon and Just the News. You're one of the last investigative journalists that's actually doing really good work in Washington, D.C. And I've said this before, you're one of 5 people in DC I actually trust to tell the truth. And so if anyone is looking for a great outlet to get your news from that is simply Just the News, it's always from John Solomon. So really appreciate your reporting there. But you also raise a really good point that in-house, when you have these taint teams that say, oh, just trust us, my colleague over here is going to review my work, it's so ridiculous when you think about a conflict of interest, because even lawyers who are members of the same firm usually can't just set up a Chinese wall and say, we're going to separate ourselves and have different clients that are on different aspects of particular cases. Their entire firm is conflicted off. So in my mind, it's the same rationale that the DOJ should not be trying to arbitrate itself and try to babysit itself and say, hey, just trust us, just trust us. I mean, this is the same FBI that Peter Strzok was part of. And as you also reported, this is actually the same division of the FBI as Crossfire Hurricane.
Yeah. Now, listen, the honor system that the Justice Department says, we're going to follow it this time. In this case, we saw how badly it was not followed, how it was abused and misused and to create illegalities, actually, in the Russia collusion case. We had agents who doctored documents. We had agents who knowingly and willfully omitted evidence that was required under the honor system, what we call exculpatory evidence. So I think all of that is a backdrop that this judge has to look at, which is, all right, we've had the problems with the taint teams. This Washington field office, the same Washington field office that played a role in the Russia collusion case. I think I want to take a look at this. And I think you're right. The written ruling is going to be very important because almost certainly one side or the other is going to go to the appeals court, which is going to be fascinating to watch. This is a debate that's probably going to stretch out for several weeks, if not several months.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you make of the argument from the DOJ just saying, well, and by the way, it's too late because we've reviewed all of the documents anyway? I mean, this is the same government that waited 18 months to even try to perform this search after negotiating with President Trump and his legal team. And then suddenly, right as Liz Cheney is losing her seat, right as there's no more interest whatsoever in the January 6th hearings, and they know that hoax has now been debunked and is not getting, a lot of street cred leading up to the midterms, suddenly this happens. And so now the government can just within a matter of weeks say, oh, we're going to hurry up and review every single document here. And sorry, too late.
Yeah, listen, the hurry up and wait thing has been the pattern of this case. I mean, this has really been going on since the spring and summer of 2021. There didn't seem to be much urgency in all of 2021. And then when the documents first are returned by President Trump in February, there isn't a lot of urgency. They wait to really May for a re-engagement. And then after they get a grand jury subpoena to the president, there's 3 or 4 weeks. And then there's a visit on June 3rd where the president's Lawyers turn over what they say are the responsive documents, and then another 8 weeks pass. So it's interesting. They didn't have much urgency about national security for 18 or 19 months while this went on. They only had an urgency when a certain clock began ticking, and that's the election clock. A lot of Americans don't know this, but August 8th was a very significant date. It was 91 days before the midterm elections, which means under the U.S. Attorney's Manual, if they were going to follow it, it was the last possible day to do something public in a case that had political implications. Clearly, going after the leader of the opposition party, it would have implications. President Trump is the titular head of the Republican Party, and so they couldn't do it 90 days or in if they're following the manual. So they rushed to do it on the 8th. And now all of a sudden they're hurry up because the election is sitting in the backdrop. I think you're going to see the court say, you know what? You didn't have this much urgency a year ago. I think we're going to take our time and do this the right way. I think that's what we'll probably see. The circuit that the Florida court is in is a very deliberative circuit. It's a circuit that doesn't like to be rushed. And so, if this gets to the next level of the appeals court, it's probably going to slow down, and we're all going to take a deep breath and probably learn a lot of things in the process that have been run roughshod over, certainly in the media.
Yeah. And looking at the judge saying that she was inclined before the arguments today to appoint a special master absolutely makes sense. And, one of the things that the DOJ argued beyond the ridiculous, it seems like just their knee-jerk reaction to everything that President Trump files is that, oh, you don't have standing. Well, to say that a property owner doesn't have a Fourth Amendment protected right to privacy in their own dwelling and wouldn't have standing to challenge a raid like that and challenge even a property interest in the documents. I mean, we know that they took his personal passports. I mean, none of that makes sense. But then also to say that somehow a special master would undermine national security interests, that would be like saying we can't even adjudicate this in court because that undermines national security. And that seems to just be a blanket catch-all excuse for the DOJ to say, listen, government is sacrosanct. You can never question what we're doing. I mean, that's like Stalinist tactics.
It's really pretty remarkable to see in the strength and breadth of the United States government now. It feels comfortable proposing censorship to social media and pressuring them. It feels comfortable being the sole arbiter of what is attorney-client privilege or executive privilege. It feels comfortable in a current president waiving the executive privilege of a prior president. It feels comfortable in mandating things that aren't required by law, such as vaccines in private business. And of course, it feels incredibly comfortable and emboldened to, on a daily basis, do things like erase billions, tens and hundreds of billions of dollars of student loan without a law being passed. It is more imperial a federal bureaucracy and more imperial of a presidency that we've seen in a long time. And the proof of this is that time and again, as the Biden administration has tried to assert authority that goes beyond what the Constitution gives the president and the executive branch, you've seen them lose case after case after case after case. One of the most important cases that came out got a little overshadowed with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, understandably, because it's such a big moment, but is West Virginia versus EPA. When you look at that ruling, you see a very grave rebuke of the mindset of bureaucrats. Well, a lot of people think we have a fourth branch of government, the bureaucracy. But right now, the bureaucracy and the president are one, the executive branch. You see a mindset that they can do what they want, when they want, how they want it, without Congress legislating, without the courts getting involved. And I think that mentality tips into this case. You see a Justice Department that basically argues that it is both omniscient and omnipotent. It knows better than the court, and it has the power to really do what it wants. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this judge is going to rule. She's tipped her hand a little bit, saying she was inclined. We'll see if anything in today's arguments changed it. I didn't see any big scores either way on both sides. I kind of reiterated what the brief said. And so my guess is the judge will go with her inclination, which he's already previously expressed.
Yeah, I think so as well. And, you make a very good point that this is a runaway executive that thinks that it's omniscient and omnipotent. And they even said as much in the DOJ's first response to the motion by President Trump by saying, listen, these are our documents and we can do with them whatever we want. And this is something where, President Trump can't exclude them from reviewing their own material, but they fail to say this isn't even just within the context and the confinement of the executive branch. I mean, they are openly saying that this is a criminal investigation. So they are necessarily putting the Department of Justice as an adversary to President Trump, which is why due process is all the more important here. So I found that argument to be very unpersuasive and very disingenuous as well. And so, as we're looking at this particular DOJ, do you think that we're going to get any further statements from Merrick Garland that, espouse, we need to just bolster the credibility of the FBI, even though we know that they're liars. We, try to espouse the transparency, even though they're fighting transparency. What do you think we can expect from the DOJ at this point?
Well, listen, I think one of the most remarkable things that Merrick Garland did happened just 2 days ago, and that is when he sent out a note to all the Justice Department staff after these reports that there have been 20 whistleblowers that have come forward to report wrongdoing, particularly political tampering of criminal investigations involving Donald Trump and Hunter Biden, two very high-profile names, right? As soon as these people came forward, they went to people like Jim Jordan and Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson. He sends a letter saying, I don't want you talking to Congress. What further statement of a lack of transparency, of imperial power can you imagine? He doesn't even want the branch that our founding fathers gave constitutional authority for oversight to have access to his employees. He wants to control every aspect of this. And I think you saw a Justice Department today that not only argued it was omnipotent and omniscient, but that it didn't need to be subjected to transparency, that it didn't need to be slowed down in any way. And I think the national security argument is a pretty tough argument to make. I'll just tell you one anecdote that I learned as I've been reporting. I haven't had a chance to get this in a story yet, but I will, but we'll give it to you first.
Breaking news here with John Solomon.
Where's the little banner? We can throw the banner up. It's really interesting. There was a document, we've seen it written about a lot in the Washington Post, New York Times. They're obsessed about it. A letter that apparently came from Kim Jong-un to the president during their negotiations. A lot of this letter has already been reported in the public. But a year ago, that was one of the things that the National Archives early on wanted back. They learned that the president had either made a copy of it or took it with them. They wanted it back. And when they were into discussions about getting it back, do you know how they suggested that the president could send this fairly sensitive document back to the National Archives? They said, drop it into FedEx, drop it in the mail, drop it into FedEx. Can't be that big a national security risk that the president had this document because you're trusting FedEx to bring it back. I don't know. I had a FedEx package lost recently, so I have a little sensitivity on this maybe. But I think the hyperbole that you see in this last 3 weeks since this dispute broke out into the public in the backdrop of an election is undercut by the way the Justice Department has acted for most of the last 12 or 15 months, or the archives. And it's why so many people distrust this Justice Department. We need to have trust in the FBI. We need to have trust in the Justice Department. We have to believe that justice is blind and doesn't have a political motive. A majority of Americans no longer believe that. And that's a credibility problem for this Justice Department, for this FBI. And the more Merrick Garland tries to play hardball and to run roughshod over issues like transparency, I think the more he's eroding the public trust, the more he feels like a stooge of the president. And let's keep in mind the story broke a couple of weeks ago that I think is the most important thing to remember about this case. The criminal case begins because President Biden got involved. President Biden instructed, this is according to his own archives administrator, he instructed the National Archives to give the documents of Donald Trump to the FBI so they could open up a grand jury investigation. He then instructed the archives, or gave the permission of the archives, you can waive my political rival's executive privilege if you so choose. President Biden took the initial actions that led for his chief rival, the leader of the opposition party, to come under criminal investigation. And that optic, Nancy Pelosi once was worried about optics, that optic is very troubling to a lot of people in the American public today.
As it should be. And then Joe Biden comes out through his press secretary and says that he had absolutely no knowledge of the pending search warrant and the raid beforehand. I just don't buy that. Do you? Well,
listen, it could very well be he doesn't know the warrant. He can't deny that he didn't know there was an investigation or that he started it, right? And it's very interesting how they deny things. They're asked a broad question and they make a specific denial. That tells you they know that they were at the ignition point of this. They can't dispute that letter that we put into the public a couple of weeks ago. And this White House is very good at, if they're not giving fictional answers like, oh, people aren't walking across the border, but I can see them walking across the border. Oh, don't believe your eyes. or President Biden's really not involved. Oh, yeah, he might have actually started it, but he's really not involved. Trust us. I think over time you're beginning to even see even some of the mainstream media roll their eyes on some of these statements that come off the podium. But the most important thing is the American people are way smarter than the White House press secretary gives them credit. And a lot of these answers just aren't ringing true to everyday Americans. They know what's going on here. And I think they're looking to the courts to be an honest referee of this dispute.
Absolutely. And as well, they should. And that shouldn't be a partisan issue. A due process is never partisan. And we've said that over and over again throughout all of these different targetings of President Trump in any context over the last 6 years, that due process and getting to the truth should never be partisan. But it seems like all of the leftist blue checks on Twitter and all of these people who are so gleeful to say, oh, this is finally the thing that's going to take down President Trump, they don't care about any of that. And they would literally rip apart the Constitution if it meant taking down President Trump. That's how much they hate him. And that really surprises me because as much as, I absolutely hated the idea that Hillary Clinton could ever get anywhere near the White House, I would never, as an American, much less as a lawyer, ever advocate that due process was not achieved and performed and justice served in any instance regarding Hillary Clinton. Due process is due process. Justice is justice. No matter if your last name is Clinton or your last name is Trump, that is the American system. But it doesn't at all seem like that's what's going on. And I think you're right. The American people are sick and tired of this. And even Democrats should be sick and tired of this because all they're doing is setting a partisan precedent that everything is weaponized. And so then it really matters whether the person who's in the Oval is a D or an R as it relates to the Department of Justice. And that is fundamentally scary. So turning, John, to then the whistleblowers, and all of this that came out from Merrick Garland. I mean, as someone who was subpoenaed by the January 6th committee, and everybody's saying like, oh, no assertions of executive privilege, no assertions of even attorney-client privilege, none of that. You guys are obligated to go and do literally anything that this committee that was actually composed against their own mandate, you have to go and do that. As somebody who was subpoenaed, I just like to say, Merrick Garland, what the heck are you thinking? I mean, this just smacks again of partisanship.
Yeah, listen, and you've talked about there are Democrats and liberals that are getting heartburn, and that's really true. I mean, you take a look at someone like Alan Dershowitz, who, he provided a defense for the president during impeachment, but he's a lifelong liberal, longtime member of the ACLU until recently, and a guy who voted for Joe Biden by his own admission in 2020. And he's deeply, deeply troubled by what the Biden administration is doing here. And he posited this really great question the other day when I was talking to him, which is, imagine if Donald Trump said back in the middle of the Hunter Biden scandal, I'm waiving all of Obama and Biden's privileges, and you can have all the Hunter Biden documents. By the way, I would have loved that because I was reporting on it, but he didn't do that. But imagine if it did, how would the Biden administration, the Obama administration, or the bureaucrats or the mainstream media react? And the answer is they would have been up to their knickers with an outrage and calling it a scandal. And yet the exact same thing has happened, just switch the characters, and there's an absolute silence, including from organizations like the ACLU that used to, at least in theory, fight for people's civil liberties and their rights and their privileges like attorney-client privilege. And so it's an interesting moment to see an entire side that used to fight for these issues be silent because of the politics of it. Not good for America. And I think we're moving to a point, and as that's going on, right, we have the privileges and the Biden sicking the FBI on the president, a former president, President Trump. You now have an extraordinary filing in court that came out today. Two attorneys general, Louisiana and Missouri, Jeff Landry and Eric Schmidt, just got discovery through their subpoena power. And they now have, this is a remarkable fact. We're going to write more about this tonight at justthenews.com, but 13 federal agencies have been involved in efforts to pressure news media and social media to censor Americans' opinions, thoughts, news stories, and information. 13 in a country where the Constitution says that no law shall be passed to be a bridge, that it would abridge the free speech and right of Americans. And when you look at some of the language that these attorneys general have found, you see incredible comments. This is one that came out of the Homeland Security Department. We need to apply maximal pressure, which may mean getting the White House involved. preferably getting the White House involved, to get social media companies to expand their censorship. Maximal pressure. The crushing power of the state is being used by 13 federal agencies under this president to censor free speech in America. That is another thing that in a different generation, the ACLU and Patrick Leahy and all of the so-called liberals in Congress would have been outraged about. They are silent in the face of one of the greatest erosions of the First Amendment ever witnessed in our history.
Yeah, this is just an incredible yield from discovery by both Jeff Landry and Eric Schmidt, who, by the way, I know both of them personally, love and respect both of them. I think they're using their positions exactly as they should to make sure to keep the federal government accountable. And I love that President Trump really has returned a lot of the emphasis through his administration onto state sovereignty. And we saw that, of course, most prominently during COVID. But, I think a lot of the American people now, especially through the Dobbs decision, are seeing how important states' rights and understanding what states can do to compel the federal government to remain accountable and to actually follow the Constitution, how incredibly important that is. But this also reminds me, John, of President Trump's lawsuit against big media and for his own censorship off of Twitter. And of course, the political pundits laughed at the time when he said, basically, social media is acting as an agent of the government. That was one of his chief arguments. He's being proven correct here yet again.
Yeah, and we're going through these emails, and there's over 711 pages of them. So we're going to learn a lot more in the next 2 to 4 hours. We'll have new updates. But think of this statement. This statement comes from the head of the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. By the way, an agency that lied to the American public in the aftermath of the November 2020 election. At that time, the CISA said that there were no foreign hackings of election databases in America. 8 months later, the FBI, or excuse me, 10 months later, the FBI brought a criminal case which made clear the government knew in the summer of 2020 that Iranian-backed hackers had breached a voter state database with 100,000 and obtained 100,000 voter identities and used them to influence the election. So this is an agency that was involved in disinformation, but it wants to impose its own disinformation regimen on the social media companies. And this is its director, Jen Easterly, writing in an email when she realizes that the social media companies don't really want to roll over right away. This is what listen to this mentality. This is the deep state mentality. Platforms have got to get more comfortable with government. In other words, let me interpret that. Platforms have to get used to us censoring them. Yeah. That is what these bureaucrats are writing in government documents in a country where the First Amendment said we all have the right to free speech, even if our opinions are offensive. We have the right. This woman actually is talking about we have to program the social media companies to bend to the will of government. These are what's in these documents. Extraordinary. One of the greatest threats to the First Amendment I've certainly seen in my 30 plus years as a journalist.
Yeah, so well said. And, this just goes into Google trying to censor Truth Social off of its platform for not censoring enough. I mean, President Trump created Truth Social to be the antithesis of Twitter. And now we're not even allowed to have these alternative platforms because we don't have viewpoint discrimination and bias. And, even though the big leftist blue checks aren't going to come onto Truth Social, the content moderation there is so much better and so much more aligned with what a platform actually should be than any of these other big tech giants. So in just the last few minutes I have with you here, John Solomon, editor-in-chief of Just the News, everybody, I'll be paying attention to all of the breaking stories coming out in just the next few hours, as John has said. So where do we go from here? What's your prediction in terms of will the DOJ be held accountable, and will big tech be held accountable as well?
Well, listen, I think the first thing you can take, and this has always been the thing, I think you and I had a discussion about this a couple of years ago, and I think it's come to be true, the failure to bring more people to account in the Russia collusion misdeeds that we now know to be so extensive, embolden the Justice Department to say, let's take another crack at Donald Trump. Let's do this. We'll pierce his privilege without going to the courts. We'll do all these things. I think the lack of accountability for prior bad acts, for prior false stories that were foisted on the American people through the power of the United States government has created a mentality among the bureaucrats. Well, we could do it again. There's no consequence. Maybe a couple gets fired, but don't worry about it. That is, I think, the first thing. The lack of accountability has created an acceleration to the weaponization of these federal agencies. I think all of this is going to end up in the courts. I think we're going to see, as we saw in June, with many historic rulings coming out of the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court being the ultimate arbiter on a lot of these different issues, privilege, and hopefully people believe they're going to take this filter team case, this taint team case. I think you're going to see the government do it, and I think you're going to see the lead warriors on this, not the members of Congress, because Republicans have been tepid, and sometimes, not all of them, but many of the leaders at least, tepid and muddled in the Congress, right? Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy, not that strong in their outrage over these things. But these states' governors and these states' attorneys general exercising that federalism that you just talked about, I think they're going to be the actors who force these things into the court. That's been the dynamic of the last 18 months on COVID, and it's now accelerating on immigration, on ESG, the environmental social governance, liberal ideology, and I think it will also be the case in some of the censorship. So expect a busy resolution of these matters in the courts is where my guess is.
Yeah, well, and it all just goes back to what our founders understood is the hallmark of a well-run government, which is federalism as well as the separation of powers. They were so wise to give us both of those things in our U.S. Constitution, and genuine conservatives want to preserve and protect our rule of law for exactly that purpose. So very well said. John Solomon, editor-in-chief of Just the News. Follow him
Thanks,
on
Jenna.
all social media. And I really appreciate you joining me today. Always such brilliant insights and perspectives. Thanks so much.
Great to be with you, Jenna. Have a good night.
Thanks. Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. MyPillow is having their biggest sheet sale of the year. You all have helped build MyPillow into the amazing company that it is today. Now, Mike Lindell, the inventor and CEO, wants to give back exclusively to you, his listeners. The Percale bed sheet set is available in a variety of colors and sizes, and they are all on sale. So, for example, the queen size is regularly priced at $89.98, but is now only $39.98 with our listener promo code Jenna, Jenna. So order now, because when they're gone, they're gone. The Percale bed sheets are breathable and have a cool and crisp feel. These come with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee, so don't miss out on this incredible offer. There's a limited supply, so be sure to order now. You can call 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna, or go to mypillow.com/Jenna. You can click on the radio listeners square and use the promo code Jenna. That's Jenna. Thank you so much to all of Mike Lindell's listeners and listeners of this podcast for making sure to support MyPillow and using our exclusive listener promo code Jenna. That's Jenna.